Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture Albion Never Dies. Today is all about British motor racing with my friend Chris, who is known on Instagram as British Bond Addict. He first appeared back in 2021 on the episode The 7 Pillars of Britishness, an interview with Instagram's British Bond Addict. And then he came on again to talk about Bond, James Bond, back in episode 14. That was great. And then he also joined me for L is for London, along with Pete Brooker from Tailors of Love, and more recently, the Back in Britain for a visit to London meeting from Tailors of Love, Daniel Gaster, and British Bond Addict. So I'm delighted to have him for the 5th time. Absolutely delighted. And he gives me, I'm quite the novice on this, he gives me a guide to British motor racing. Okay, Chris, thank you very, very much for joining me once again.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be on the podcast. And it's interesting, you seem to get me on for all the things I love talking about. So it's absolutely fine by me.
It's always good to talk about things you love. Actually, I was just listening back to the Thunderbirds episode just earlier today. I wanted to check something before I put it out on the YouTube. But yeah, it was really, really cool. I think we just talked quickly on Instagram. I was like, you know stuff about British motorsport.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've been a big fan of motorsport for a while, and that's even gone to the stage of actually being a semi-professional motor racer myself.
Yes. So if that's the point we want to get to, first of all, what grabbed you about it when you first got grabbed?
It was interesting. My story of motorsport's kind of a weird one. My brother and father have been into it since as long as I can remember, and I had knowledge about it. I just wasn't particularly fussed about it in a great extent. But back in 2010, my brother got cancer. He's in remission now. Spoiler, so he's all okay. He got cancer, and as a result, the Willow Trust, I believe it was, gave him the opportunity to go to an event, get a free ticket. And because he was such an F1 fan, he wanted a ticket to Sunday at the Silverstone British Grand Prix in 2011. They came back and they actually gave our whole family tickets for the whole weekend. So we kind of went all together. And I don't know what it was. I know the exact point I fell in love with motorsport. I was watching the Formula 2 race, and it was kind of wet. It's one of those interesting setups. And second place was slowly catching first over a long period of time. And it was it's that consistency over and over. And that sort of racing hooked me. And I went into the event knowing about F1 and looking forward to a fun weekend. I left a super fan. I was absolutely And that was the moment it grabbed me, that weekend. And a couple of weeks later, I went into just to see whatever go-karting I could do, and it kind of spiraled out of control after that.
Wow, I'm sensing the fiery passion of a convert.
Yes, it was very peculiar to be so sort of laid back about it, and then to come out of it so enthralled. I've not missed a single Formula One race since July 2011 now. That's how insane it is.
Okay, wow. And for some of this, I'm nodding along. You mentioned F2. I've heard of F1. I suppose 2 questions. 1, what is F2? And 2, how many Fs are there?
There's actually quite a few. So in Europe, single-seater motorsport is kind of the biggest, while in some places like America, you get oval racing with stock cars. But Formula relates to the type of, basically the degrees of motorsport that they have. So Formula 1 is the prime. Officially, there's 3 that are linked to Formula 1 drives. But at a regional level, you can get Formula 4. There used to be Formula Ford, which was, owned by Ford Cars. You get Formula Regional in different European standings, and there's load of formulas essentially. There's loads of them about, but it's basically a way to start the ideal goal for most European races is Formula 1. So to put yourself kind of on that path as early as possible, it sounds good on your CV essentially.
Okay, so the Formula 1 that's the highest level, Formula 2, but we're not talking Division 1, Division 2, are we?
It kind of is in a bizarre way.
Oh, okay.
You can't really get relegated. Like when you're in Formula 3, you either go up to Formula 2 or you go and race elsewhere. You can't really get relegated from Formula 1 down again, but that is kind of a sign of the quality. But yes, Formula One is the absolute pinnacle. Most Europeans would agree it's probably the pinnacle of motorsport in general. Other places might disagree, especially when it comes to different types of racing. But yeah,
you mentioned most Europeans. You are currently in the US.
yes,
It's okay to say that.
yes, it will.
Would that be recognised as the pinnacle of motor racing in the USA?
No, for some American drivers it is because they have a greater knowledge in specific circumstances. But for many people in the USA, they have IndyCar, they have NASCAR, and they're happy with that, and that is the pinnacle for them. For many Americans, of course, staying in the country and doing, the cars in IndyCar aren't as quick as Formula One, but they are close, and it's then again an open wheeler thing where the wheels are outside of the cockpit. So staying in America and doing that is probably the pinnacle for them personally. But F1 is considered a tougher and more, exclusive racing club because there's only 20 races while IndyCar has about 36, I think, off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's often that weird disconnect between the rest of the world and America.
It is, yes, and Formula One is trying desperately hard to break into America. There's three American F1 races this year, so they're trying very hard to break into that market. I assume because there's a lot of money there.
That would make sense.
But yeah, so maybe some Americans will be coming around, but of course the Indy 500 is still called the greatest spectacle in motorsport, and there's actually an interesting little thing about that. The Indianapolis 500, the Le Mans 24 Hours, and the Monaco F1 race, these are considered the Triple Crown, like the three premier motorsport events in the world. And only one person, a Brit, has ever won all three. So, yeah.
Who was it?
Graham Hill back in the 70s. He was a Formula One world champion, and his son later became a champion too, Damon Hill, who I bizarrely met. Yeah, I bizarrely met him in an arcade in Dorset one day.
It's nice to have a little random encounter.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember Damon Hill, so that's why I'm like, oh yeah, he was a big star.
Yeah, his dad was a multiple world champion. He only won it once, but they were the first father-son duo, and only two fathers and sons have become world champions.
Oh, who was the other?
Nico Rosberg and his father Keke Rosberg in the 80s.
Okay. Yeah. And those, I'm imagining, those are very different types of races involving very different skills.
What, between the two generations or between?
I'm more thinking when you get the Triple Crown.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's normally because obviously the Le Mans 24 Hours, you use hypercars, big souped up cars. Indy 500 and F1 are more similar. The cars are different, but of course in Monaco you have the tightest, twistiest, smallest track in the world. And in IndyCar you are flat on the accelerator almost the entire time, and it's an oval, which we really don't have in the UK. Oval racing is basically a US thing, and it came from moonshine running. Bizarrely, they wanted to test who had the fastest moonshine running car, so they drove it in circles, and then that became NASCAR. But yes, it's three very different types of racing, and of course the Le Mans 24 Hours is a 24-hour race. You normally do it with three other people. It's not one poor sod the entire time.
Yeah, so okay, that's good to know. I think there might be some health and safety stuff going on there if it was one guy driving 24 hours.
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. Some people have done 24-hour races by themselves, but never when it's to that extent.
Right. Now, when we talk about sport and Britishness, and this podcast is supposed to touch on Britishness, normally it's kind of Britain invented, or perhaps more accurately, codified a thing. Sometimes being successful at the thing afterwards, sometimes we taught it to others far too well. What is the British connection to, motor racing?
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, the words Grand Prix, which are used for each race, especially in the races I follow, is French. However, the British we kind of came along in such a way that we fell in love with motorsport so much, we gave it real prominence, especially in the UK. And that helped form other things. And it mainly formed Formula One. The first ever championship race was in the UK because of the amount of effort and money the British were putting into it. It's the same track I have tattooed on my leg at Silverstone, which is a fantastic track. But yes, the first round was
tattooed on your leg.
I do indeed, yes. I'll send it to you afterwards. My right leg has the outline of Silverstone tattooed. I don't have Muffy in true Bond fashion, but I do have an F1 racetrack instead.
Listeners will simply have to imagine your leg.
Exactly. I'm so sorry. But yes, the first Formula One race was in Silverstone, and it's been the race that's been on the calendar the second most after Monaco, I believe. But the British had a fleet of really good racetracks very early on, and Grand Prix racing was a thing way before, like, middle of 1920s, 1930s, and we had some British drivers who are prominent. The most prominent has a very unfortunate name. His name was Dick Seaman, but he was a very good motor racer, and he raced for Mercedes. He was probably, yeah.
When you're naming the boy, Dick, you know what you're doing.
Exactly. When you got the surname of that as well. But he was a very prominent motor racer and was one of the ones that kind of gave general interest. For a long time, motorsport was considered for those who have far too much money and far too little sense. And considering the fatality rate up until the 80s, they were probably right. But the UK had after the Second World War, the UK had a host of airfields, and they didn't really know what to do with it. And they turned quite a few of them into racetracks, Silverstone being one of them. They used the perimeter track, added some corners, and then all of a sudden their now useless airfield actually became a source for people to come and watch motor racing.
Okay.
So that's why Britain has quite so many different racetracks in such a short space. So yeah, it's hard. I don't think you can drive more than an hour and a half in a direction in the UK and not come across a racetrack. Like that's how frequently they are. And
I'm assuming, especially in the south, with all the Battle of Britain kind of old airfields.
Absolutely, and you got a few definitely up in the Midlands sort of area as well, for the west and east side. But yeah, so the amount of money we put in, and then I don't know what it was, but the British have always been very successful at motorsport. I'm not really sure why that is. With a country, as small as ours, perhaps it's easier to find this talent and to breed it because it's easier to get into motorsport, maybe. I mean, it's still insanely difficult. But the British have, I think, it's something like 380 Formula One wins, and the next nation behind them is Germany, and they have like half of that. So Britain, Britain are at the top, and we've also had the most successful teams as well. Teams like Aston Martin, who have recently become successful, teams like Williams, some teams which have taken a bit more of a mantle, like McLaren, which was a New Zealand team, but has kind of become British in recent years. So yeah, it's been a huge thing of British pride in motorsport, and also it's been a big cause for many jobs as well. Many people have come to it. But yes, we've had so many successful champions, and these aren't just champions in Formula One. Like John Surtees was a British motorbike champion, as well as a Formula One champion as well. All of the British people in the 60s and 70s who were winning races did race in America at the same time, especially for the Indy 500. And it's all up and down. The Scottish are particularly good at motor racing as well. We've got some of the most popular, successful racing drivers, most notably Jim Clark in the 60s, who still holds world F1 records to this day, was a very proud Scot. But as with many people at that time, his life was somewhat cut short during a Formula 2 race, which he didn't even need to be doing. He was just doing it for fun.
On that note, I think we have reference to a British land speed record in Die Another Day.
Yes, we do, with the Bluebird, right, I believe?
Yes.
And I think that was on the way back that had an issue, as opposed to being the way there. But yeah, I think the British have just enjoyed going fast and doing silly things about it. I mean, when you think about, our escapades during World War II and that stuff, we had lots of foolhardy people who are willing to go very fast for fun.
Yes. The whole of human history, someone told me, is go faster.
Yes. But yes, the success as well for Britain has continued very much through to the modern day. I mean, with Lewis Hamilton at the moment being the most successful F1 driver of all time, with 103 wins and nearly 300 podiums, it's just something that's continued. I mean, the Finnish are known for their rallycross driving. We've got some Germans who are known for more the mechanical side of things, but there's been some very successful ones. The British just seem to have that ability. I mean, I think it's, what is it? Because when they go onto the podium, they have all three nationalities of the people on the podiums. I think less than a 20th of all the podiums in F1 haven't had a British flag on them.
Wow.
Some measure. Wow. It's insane. But yes, we get lots of joy, lots of fun. And the fan base in England is also quite huge. You can probably see this from skyrocketing F1 tickets if you've tried. But yeah, we got some balmy fans out there who enjoy watching it as well.
Yes, I think we have a mutual friend in Daniel Gaster who I didn't hear from for a while. He was at the Formula One.
Oh, yeah. I went to Silverstone for the F1 4 times, and I went to Hungary. And I went to Hungary for the F1 as well. And it was a completely different atmosphere. Silverstone is such an important place to me. But watching those races live and hearing those cars is something else.
Mm. Yeah. So you still get the thrill of actually going to see it live.
Yes, I mean, I wish I was there doing it myself personally, but watching it live is still something special. There's just something about it, and I've watched lots of other forms of motorsport. Nothing does it quite as well as F1, and I think that's probably because it's my personal preference and my favorite sport. But there's just something about it, and I remember it's 2013, and I was very much into F1, and we went to Silverstone for the second time. We're in there's one corner called Luffield, which has a huge kind of awning behind it, a roof or a ceiling behind the grandstand. And I was sitting there watching the racing, and this is back when they had incredibly loud V8 engines. And I had one earphone in whilst I was watching, so I could listen to team radios and commentary and see what was going on, and then the other ear open so I could just hear the cars screeching past. And that was great. I watched a practice session for about an hour and a half, went down chatting to my brother. And as I left the grandstand and took my earphone out, my left ear was almost completely blocked from all the sound that had been barraging into my ear, whilst my right ear had been like pristinely kept. So my was off. And it's incredible things like that. It's no wonder why they start selling headphones at these events. I probably should have invested myself as well.
Oof. But you also mentioned that you have driven.
Yes, I was. I've got some races actually this August, which I'm going to be doing. But for the last 10 years or so, I've been on the calendar quite frequently, racing in open wheeler cars. So when it's one cockpit, wheels on the outside, and then first across the line wins. I've been doing it myself. I was sponsored for quite a while up until the pandemic, and I need to chat with my sponsor again and see if they'll still pay me, because it is awfully expensive.
Which is interesting to me. Hang on, that you have a sponsor. I mean, this is serious stuff.
Yes, I was very lucky. I was working at a gliding club, and I talked to people about racing there, and one conversation led to another, which led to it. And that seems to be most of the cases of people I know who are sponsored in motorsport. It's not that you actively go out and find one, unless you're like really up there and you've got like 16 sponsors anyway. It's more that the right luck occurs at a random point. I wasn't looking to be sponsored, but they gave me some guidelines and said, if you hit these, we'll send you a lot of money. And I managed to hit those guidelines, and here we are. So
that is wonderful. It's wonderful just to hear. So kind of went from, you said go-karting. You said that was your initial entry. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes, I started with indoor go-karting, just because it was the most easily available thing, and these are very small, weak. When it's indoors as well, it's kind of off on what the weight distribution is anyway. That moved on to outdoor go-karting, which is a step up and slightly faster. Then they went on to license karts, which are very powerful. And it's weird. Often I remember when I was driving at that level, saying it was karting, people would be like, "Oh, that sounds so laid back." When you get into higher level karting, it is incredible. And most F1 drivers, and I kind of agree myself as well, say karting is the purest form of motorsport. There's so little to affect the car apart from wheels, axes, and engine, and then that's it. And these things book it. I mean, you're sitting very low to the ground anyway, so the immersion of speed is faster, but you're hitting like 100 miles an hour on the end of the straights. And just like old F1 cars, there's no seatbelts. If you crash, you kind of want to be thrown from the car just in case there's a fire. So.
Okay, wow, these are serious go-karts.
Yes, and that's the thing. There's so much fun, but then it's one of those things. It's great fun. You're not thinking about anything, and then if there's an accident at high speed, you're like, oh wait, there is no crumple zone. There are no airbags. But you don't think about it. Just put your foot on the pedal.
Probably best not to. Yeah. As for Formula One, I mean, the drivers seem to walk away from the most incredible crashes.
Yes, there's a fatality in Formula 2 a couple of years ago, Antoine Hubert, but that was a freak accident. Apart from that, the last F1 related death was Jules Bianchi, and again, that was a crash with an F1 car and a JCB, not a crash that happened on track. Yeah, it was very awful. But it's one of those things. It was a case of a car shouldn't be put against that stress, and in a normal situation, it wouldn't. When an F1 car is testing itself against, in regular crashes, it is incredibly safe. And they've even introduced the Halo now. It's a big, very sturdy carbon fiber ring, essentially, that goes around the top of the cockpit. And I hated it when it first came out. I thought it ruined the look of the cars. I thought it was awful. And then there's been about 2 incidents where it's definitely saved somebody's life already. And I was so happy to put my words on that. There's one incident with Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen, in which Verstappen's car was catapulted on top, And if it hadn't been for the halo, the wheel would have landed directly on top of Hamilton and then, bounced off. But because the halo was there, it just kind of supported it. And instead it brushed his head just a tiny bit. And when you see something like that, you're like, okay, I don't care. I was wrong. I was so wrong.
Yes, absolutely. That's good to know that it's safer than it used to be. We will probably never see the drivers running towards the car to start up, will we?
You get that in Le Mans still.
Do you?
Yeah, that's the Le Mans start. They start on the opposite side of their car, sprint towards it, get in, turn the ignition on. For the love of the God, don't drop the clutch. I think they do that for the Le Mans Classic. I think for the regular Le Mans, they don't do that. They just start in a formation grid. But Le Mans Classic, which is almost just as big as Le Mans itself, they still have that start. It's brilliant to see.
Absolutely. If someone was thinking of getting into this sport, just to check it out, what would you advise?
Oh, go-karting. Everyone in motorsport essentially starts at go-karting, no matter what age. And that's the place to do it. I mean, I would highly recommend outdoor karts because it's more representative of real racing. Indoors, it's like you go up to maybe 15 miles an hour, then you have to brake and stamp and do a 90-degree turn. And it's fun, but that's kind of just for messing around. If you actually want to get a real racing experience, go onto a go-kart track, or most tracks, they have sessions where a professional will drive you around the track. So I'd also recommend that as well. That's awfully good fun.
Is it different? Like, obviously, it must be different being a passenger to being the driver, because as the passenger, you have nothing else to think about except, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things as well. Like, when I've been a passenger, I've been like, wow, we're going so fast. This is insane. But then when you're driving, it's the way the human mind works. When you know what you're doing and your mind expects what's going to happen, it's dulled. Like it's like you can't tickle yourself, or when someone tickles you, it's over the top. So when you're a passenger, not pressing on the gaps, not doing all this jazz, not doing.
Sorry for the listeners, I'm experimenting, trying to tickle my rib cage here, and it's not working. So just to confirm, I've never tried this before.
Yeah, but when you're a passenger, you're not expecting the sudden G forces either side, and that's the biggest thing of racing. When you're driving it, your mind's like, I'm going to turn the wheel this way. I'm going to be automatically expected to be pushed to the outside of the car with momentum. So I always feel like being a passenger, your body tricks you and is like, oh, we're going to make this way worse than it actually is. But then when you're racing, there's times myself where you don't actually end up thinking about what the pressures are each time. You just get out of the car at the end and you're very sore. But if you're on the podium, no matter what the pain is, it's fine.
Yes. So you've been on the podium.
Yes, I have. Yes, I've I've won 9. Is it 9? I've won 9 races at the level I'm at the moment, and I think in my overall career, to sound incredibly pretentious, I've had about 78 podiums. I say about as if I don't know exactly.
That sounds like a solid career. I mean, you say, well, but that sounds solid.
Well, that's the thing. Lots of these, it's like quite a few of them have been 20-minute races. Quite a few of these have been little sprints here and there. Quite a few of the things were done with my university, the British University Karting Championship, which I took part in, and that was great fun. But yeah, and that's been great. I mean, you get different calibers of podiums. Some third places have meant more to me than a win in other cases. But normally, if I finish a race, I'm in the top 3, I'm very happy. And if I'm top 1, I'm very, very happy.
Absolutely. Well deserved. I am curious, as somebody who has driven fast and, award-winning, does it change the way you see car chases and fast cars in movies generally?
That's a very good question. It doesn't normally, because I'm kind of aware when you watch like the Aston Martin tearing around the streets of Matera, they've got cinema tires on where they're going to make lots of smoke. They've been fine-tuned to the nth degree to do these corners and such. So it's more the fact if someone's doing it, then they are driving a car and they are racing essentially, because you set up a car to how it suits you, and these guys are essentially doing the same just on film. There's quite a few times where it cuts back to the onboard camera, and it's clearly actors with a green screen. And you're like, oh,
yeah,
destroying all the immersion.
To be fair, as a non-expert, yes, I sometimes notice that too.
My favorite thing, and this is something that happened a lot, especially with 70s TV, you see a car going off a ramp, landing, and you see all different manner of things break, but then it cuts and the car's fine driving off again. Stuff like that is, you notice that stuff especially. But yeah, knowing that quite a few, I think actually one of the stunt drivers in No Time to Die, Jess Hawkins, she's actually a racing driver too. So quite a few times the actual careers cross over.
Oh, right, between stunt drivers and racers.
Yes, yeah, because normally you get that sort of thing. Like in Skyfall, you know how you've got Daniel Craig and Naomi Harris driving at the beginning.
Yeah.
The stunt driver's actually on the roof of that. He's on a roof in a special contraption.
Kind of like the Mr. Bean car, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yes. So there's no green screen. There's generally there, but just with a steering wheel that doesn't work.
Yes, they're kind of pretending and going, "Oh Jesus Christ, we're getting close to that wall."
Hopefully, they're just so focused on the acting, they're not worried about it.
I sincerely hope so. But yeah, normally most racing drivers are foolhardy to say the least, and you would find many, including myself, who would happily do that job.
Well, Eon Productions, if you are listening.
Yes, yeah, I'll send you my email.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite car chase?
Oh, Italian Job is up there. Seeing as this is a very British podcast, that's up there. The bullet car chase with the Mustang is a great one.
And we're talking the Michael Caine, the only Italian Job, definitely.
Italian Job, yeah, not the Italian Job set in Los Angeles.
Yes.
No, the Michael Caine one that's fantastic, and there's like quite a few different stunts in that, which, like the minis, it's kind of cheeky in a way. Like at one point they desperately tried to get the mini to do a full loop inside the sewer, and you see how close they get at one point, but I think they tried so hard, but they kept wrecking minis, so they're like, just do it normally, guys, please. And even on the final footage, there's still one guy really trying to get up there.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite things about the film, not to break the immersion too much, but Michael Caine couldn't drive.
Yes, no, he couldn't.
So just pretending. And so when he went for his driving test, the driving instructor, but I've seen you drive.
What's his quote? Not very many people know that. I'm sure that came out.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I'd probably say Italian Job is my top car chase. I mean, there's quite a few in my mind that I really enjoy, but just the length of it, the fact it's at that point in the film, it's all been building up to this moment, and kind of also the Britishness of it too. Red, white, and blue, all that stuff. You got to love it. And of course, Michael Caine as well being in there.
Yes, I watched it fairly recently, I think, on an airplane, and I was startled to suddenly realise, and it's John Le Mesurier, and it's, and the rest of the cast as well are phenomenal.
Yes, it's I think because, oh gosh, who plays? It's Noel Coward as well was in there. That's it. I mean, it's a fantastic piece of pop culture at that time, and it's just like a unique blend. Like films like that, I absolutely love to see, and I love that it had such a cultural impact and still does to this day.
Oh yes. I think I was in a bar a few years ago here in the UK, and they started to play it on one of the big screens, and you could just see all the conversations stopping as everyone kind of like, "No, thank you. I should just watch this."
That might be a good way if there's ever like a riot in Britain, just get a giant screen and start playing the Italian Job.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, Chris, thank you very much for joining me. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
So you can find me on Instagram under British Bond Addict. I do post a few racing things there every now and then, but it's mainly for James Bond stuff. Sartorial fun.
Who has been known to break a few traffic laws?
Oh gosh. Wouldn't dream of it. That's the quote.
Absolutely. So it's good to get an expert on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's always fun to talk about motorsport. It's such a wide thing. Just to have a little snippet of conversation is always quite fun. So I hope you've learned something.
I have. Thank you.
And thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to hear more from Chris, do check out his Instagram account, British Bond Addict. Goodbye.